The little girl had already fallen asleep on her father's shoulder, clutching a worn teddy bear so tightly that her tiny fingers had turned pale. Rain poured outside, like the sky itself had given up on hope. The exhausted man stepped into the glittering marble lobby of one of the city's most luxurious hotels, carrying nothing but a backpack, a bouquet of white lilies, and the weight of countless sleepless nights. Before he could even reach the reception desk, judging eyes followed him. Within minutes, security was quietly called. Whispers spread across the lobby, and the front desk manager looked him straight in the eyes before delivering words that shattered the silence. He was told there was no room for people like him. What no one inside that magnificent hotel knew was that the tired black single father standing before them wasn't a homeless traveler or an unwanted guest. He was the man who owned every brick of the building they proudly worked in, and before the night was over, lives would change forever. Before we continue, if you believe kindness matters more than appearances and that everyone deserves respect regardless of how they look, please take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Share this story with someone who believes in second chances. And subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that remind us of the good still left in this world. Marcus Ellison had spent his entire life proving people wrong. Growing up in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Chicago, he learned early that the world often judged people before hearing a single word they had to say. His mother cleaned hotel rooms for 25 years, while his father disappeared before Marcus could even remember his face. Every morning his mother left home before sunrise and returned after dark with aching feet and tired eyes, yet she always managed to smile for her son. She often told him that dignity wasn't something people gave you. It was something you carried inside yourself, even when the world tried to strip it away. Marcus believed every word she spoke. He studied harder than anyone around him, earned scholarships, worked 2 jobs through college, and eventually built a successful real estate company from nothing but determination and impossible dreams. Years later, after buying and restoring struggling hotels across the country, he founded the Ellison Hospitality Group, a company known not just for luxury, but for treating employees with fairness and compassion. His company's mission hung inside every staff room across every property. Every guest deserves respect. Every employee deserves dignity. Character comes before appearance. Marcus insisted on that sentence because he remembered how his own mother had once been ignored by wealthy guests who never looked her in the eyes. He wanted every hotel carrying his family's name to become the exact opposite of what she had experienced. Life, however, had tested Marcus in ways success could never protect him from. 3 years earlier, his wife Sophia lost her battle with an aggressive illness. Their daughter, 6-year-old Ava, barely understood why her mother never came home from the hospital. Overnight, Marcus became both father and mother, businessman and bedtime storyteller, school chauffeur and midnight comforter whenever nightmares came knocking. Despite running a billion-dollar company, Marcus refused to let nannies raise his daughter. Board meetings were scheduled around school performances. International business calls happened after bedtime stories. His daughter always came first. That rainy evening marked the 3rd anniversary of Sophia's passing. Every year Marcus visited the small town where they had first met. Every year he carried white lilies because they had been Sophia's favorite flowers. He intentionally avoided announcing his visits, because he believed the only honest way to evaluate his hotels was anonymously. His private jet had been delayed by severe weather, forcing him to drive several hours through relentless rain. Halfway there, Ava had fallen asleep after crying quietly from missing her mother. By the time they finally reached the Grand Ellison Hotel, Marcus looked nothing like the polished billionaire whose face occasionally appeared in business magazines. His beard had grown during the difficult week. His jacket was soaked. His expensive leather boots were muddy from changing a flat tire. His backpack looked worn after years of family travel. None of those things mattered to him. Unfortunately, they mattered to everyone watching. As Marcus approached the reception desk carrying Ava carefully on one shoulder and the lilies in his free hand, the young receptionist barely looked at his reservation. Her eyes traveled from his wet clothes to his daughter's worn backpack, before politely forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. She typed briefly before announcing that no reservations could be found. Marcus remained calm. He showed the confirmation email. She glanced at it without interest before insisting the hotel was completely full. Something didn't feel right. While Marcus quietly thanked her and asked whether another room might become available, a well-dressed businessman walked into the lobby. Within seconds, the same receptionist greeted him with excitement and handed over a room key. Marcus noticed. So did several guests nearby. The assistant manager approached with crossed arms and an expression already prepared for confrontation. Instead of checking the reservation system again, she assumed Marcus was trying to get a discounted room. Her voice remained professionally polite, but every sentence carried invisible judgment. She suggested several budget motels across town. She recommended a shelter if money was an issue. She even offered directions to a 24-hour bus station where families sometimes spent the night. Each assumption landed like another stone placed upon Marcus's heart, not because of himself. Because Ava was listening. Half asleep, the little girl opened her eyes just enough to whisper whether they had done something wrong. Marcus kissed her forehead and simply smiled. He refused to let bitterness become her lesson. Nearby guests watched the uncomfortable scene unfold. Some looked embarrassed. Others quietly avoided eye contact. A few simply assumed the staff knew something they didn't. Appearance had already written the entire story. One elderly housekeeper passing through the lobby slowed her cart and recognized something strangely familiar about Marcus. She couldn't explain why, but his calm dignity reminded her of someone she'd seen years earlier during a company leadership conference. Before she could speak, security arrived, not aggressively, just visibly enough to send a message. Marcus looked around the magnificent lobby his own company had renovated 2 years before. Every chandelier, every polished floor, every piece of artwork represented thousands of hours spent creating a place where people would feel welcome. Yet somehow the spirit of that mission had disappeared. Instead of arguing, Marcus quietly asked for the general manager. The assistant manager refused. She explained that executives didn't meet with walk-in guests making complaints. Marcus nodded respectfully. He reached into his backpack. Several employees exchanged nervous glances, assuming he might produce something dangerous. Instead, he removed a faded photograph. It showed a young hotel maid standing proudly beside a teenage boy wearing a graduation cap. "My mother cleaned hotel rooms for 25 years, Marcus said softly. She taught me that no guest should ever leave feeling smaller than when they arrived. The elderly housekeeper froze. Recognition suddenly flooded her face. She remembered attending that conference. She remembered seeing that exact photograph projected onto a giant screen while the company's founder shared the story of his mother. Her hands began trembling. Without saying a word, she hurried toward the manager's office. Minutes later, the general manager entered the lobby, adjusting his tie while clearly expecting another routine customer complaint. The moment he saw Marcus, every drop of color vanished from his face. He stopped walking. The entire lobby fell silent. The bouquet of lilies slipped slightly in Marcus's hand, as exhaustion finally became visible across his face. The general manager rushed forward, apologizing before anyone else understood what was happening. Employees stared in confusion. Security looked at each other uncertainly. The receptionist whispered that she didn't understand. The assistant manager confidently insisted there had been some mistake. Then the general manager said words that seemed to freeze time itself. "This is Mr. Marcus Ellison." Silence, complete silence. One guest slowly lowered his phone. Another covered her mouth. The receptionist's face turned ghostly white. The assistant manager's confidence disappeared instantly. Nobody could believe the soaked father carrying a sleeping child was the billionaire owner whose portrait hung inside the executive conference room upstairs. Marcus looked around the room, not with anger but with heartbreaking disappointment. He explained that he had purposely visited anonymously for years because he believed true service revealed itself only when nobody thought they were being watched. Tonight they hadn't failed a billionaire. They had failed a father. They had failed a child. Most painfully of all, they had failed every value the company claimed to represent. The general manager immediately suspended the receptionist and assistant manager pending investigation. Marcus quietly stopped him. Punishment alone wasn't enough. People needed to understand why this had happened. The next morning, every employee attended an emergency meeting. Marcus arrived wearing a simple sweater instead of an expensive suit. He placed the same bouquet of lilies at the front of the room in memory of Sophia. Then he told them about his mother. He spoke about sleeping in tiny apartments where rain leaked through broken ceilings. He spoke about being followed by store security as a teenager. He spoke about watching his exhausted mother smile at guests who barely acknowledged her existence. Many employees cried silently. Some realized they had unconsciously developed the same prejudices they once believed only other people possessed. Marcus explained that discrimination rarely announces itself loudly. Sometimes it hides behind assumptions, polite smiles, and decisions made in only a few seconds. He reminded them that true luxury wasn't marble floors or crystal chandeliers. True luxury was making every human being feel welcome. After a full investigation confirmed repeated complaints involving appearance-based profiling, the receptionist and assistant manager were officially dismissed. It wasn't because they made one mistake. It was because the investigation uncovered a pattern of treating guests differently based on how they looked. Marcus believed leadership required accountability, especially when company values were repeatedly ignored. The elderly housekeeper who had recognized Marcus wasn't promoted because she identified the owner. She was promoted because years of employee records showed she consistently treated every guest with identical warmth, whether they arrived in designer suits or worn-out jackets. That was the example Marcus wanted the entire company to follow. Months later, the Grand Ellison Hotel introduced a nationwide training program called the First Welcome, teaching employees that every interaction begins long before names, reservations, or credit cards are presented. It begins with respect. The story spread across the country, not because a billionaire fired employees, but because a father carrying his sleeping daughter reminded thousands of people that the greatest measure of character is how we treat someone when we believe they have nothing to offer us. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends and family. Your support allows us to keep bringing inspiring stories that restore faith in humanity. Special request: before we end, please leave a comment with the words, "Respect has no dress code." We'd love to see how many people believe every person deserves kindness before judgment. That evening, after everything had settled, Marcus finally carried Ava into the hotel room that had always been waiting for them. She woke just enough to notice the lilies resting beside the window. Looking up at her father with sleepy eyes, she smiled and asked if people were nice again. Marcus looked out at the rain slowly stopping outside. He thought about his mother's tired hands, Sophia's unwavering love, and the countless strangers whose hearts could still choose compassion over prejudice. Then he smiled back at his daughter, kissed her forehead, and quietly told her that sometimes people make mistakes, but what matters most is whether they have the courage to become better afterward. Outside, the first rays of morning sunlight broke through the clouds, washing the hotel in a golden glow. It was the same building that had turned away its own owner only hours before. Yet inside its walls, something far more valuable than reputation had been restored. Humanity had found its way back home. And for everyone who would walk through those doors in the years to come, they would never again be judged by their clothes, their skin, or their circumstances, but welcomed with the dignity every human being deserves. News of what happened inside the Grand Ellison Hotel spread much faster than Marcus Ellison ever expected. Someone in the lobby had quietly recorded a portion of the incident, not the moment of humiliation, but the moment the general manager recognized the exhausted father carrying his sleeping daughter. Within hours, clips flooded social media. Headlines focused on the billionaire owner who had been mistaken for an unwanted guest, but Marcus cared little for the headlines. What stayed with him was the frightened look in Ava's eyes when she had asked if they had done something wrong. That single question echoed through his mind long after the cameras disappeared. Marcus refused every television interview that week. He believed stories about compassion should never become opportunities for self-promotion. Instead, he returned to work as usual, visiting hotels across the country without warning, meeting housekeepers, maintenance workers, receptionists, and security guards. He wanted to understand not only what had gone wrong in one building, but what could be improved throughout the entire company. The incident also transformed the employees who had witnessed it. Many admitted that they had noticed something felt unfair that night, but remained silent because they assumed management knew best. Marcus reminded them during another company meeting that silence often allows injustice to grow. Kindness was not simply about being polite. Sometimes kindness required the courage to speak when something felt wrong. Among all the employees, the elderly housekeeper named Billionaire became an unexpected symbol of hope. For nearly 30 years, she had quietly worked behind the scenes, rarely receiving recognition. She had never judged guests by expensive watches or worn-out shoes. To her, every room belonged to someone carrying an invisible story. Marcus personally asked Billionaire to help redesign the company's customer service training. She laughed at first, insisting she had never gone to college and knew nothing about corporate presentations. Marcus smiled and told her that compassion was a greater qualification than any degree. Over the following months, Billionaire stood before hundreds of new employees, sharing simple lessons she had learned while cleaning hotel rooms. She spoke about grieving widows who smiled through tears, fathers traveling to children's graduations after working double shifts, grandparents spending their retirement savings on one final family vacation, and young couples celebrating their first anniversary with barely enough money for one special weekend. "You never know," she would say, "what someone had to survive before they reached our front door." Her words became more powerful than any expensive training manual. Meanwhile, Ava slowly began healing from the painful memories of that rainy night. One afternoon, she surprised Marcus by asking if they could visit the same hotel again. The request caught him off guard. He gently asked why she wanted to return. Her answer nearly brought him to tears. She explained that she didn't want to remember the hotel as the place where people were mean. She wanted to remember it as the place where people learned to be kind. Children often understood forgiveness better than adults. Several weeks later, Marcus and Ava quietly returned. This time there were no cameras, no executives lined up to greet them, no speeches. The employees simply welcomed them with genuine smiles. Some recognized Ava immediately and knelt to hand her a small teddy bear wearing a tiny hotel uniform. Around its neck hung a handwritten tag. "Everyone belongs." Ava hugged the bear tightly. Marcus realized that real change had finally begun. The hotel itself also changed. A large framed plaque appeared behind the reception desk. It did not mention Marcus by name. Instead, it read, "Every guest arrives carrying a story we cannot see. Our responsibility is not to judge that story. Our responsibility is to make them feel safe enough to continue writing it." Guests often stopped to read the words. Many smiled before checking in. Others quietly took photographs. The message reached far beyond that single hotel. Months later, Marcus launched a foundation in his mother's honor called the Open Door Initiative. Its mission was simple: provide emergency hotel accommodations for single parents, families displaced by disasters, and caregivers traveling with seriously ill children. Every Ellison hotel reserved several rooms each night for families facing unexpected hardships. No publicity campaigns, no press releases, just quiet acts of kindness. Marcus believed the greatest generosity was the kind that expected nothing in return. As winter approached, another unexpected visitor walked through the doors of the Grand Ellison Hotel. It was the former receptionist. She no longer wore a designer uniform. Instead, she looked nervous, humble, and deeply changed. She asked if Marcus would be willing to meet her. Many executives advised against it. Marcus agreed immediately. When she entered his office, tears filled her eyes before she could speak. Losing her job had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. During weeks of unemployment, she volunteered at a local shelter simply to keep busy. There she met people whose lives had been destroyed by illness, domestic violence, unexpected layoffs, and circumstances completely beyond their control. For the first time, she understood how dangerous assumptions could become. She admitted that she had spent years believing appearances revealed character. Now she knew better. Marcus listened quietly. When she finished, he thanked her for taking responsibility instead of making excuses. He explained that forgiveness never erased consequences, but genuine growth deserved another opportunity. Although she would not return to her previous position, Marcus connected her with one of the Foundation's community outreach programs, where empathy mattered more than appearances. She accepted with gratitude. Years later, she would become one of the Foundation's strongest advocates for treating every person with dignity. Sometimes people truly changed. Not because they were punished, but because they finally understood the pain they had caused. Time continued moving forward. Ava grew older. Every year on Sophia's anniversary, she and Marcus still carried white lilies together. They no longer remembered only loss. They remembered love. On Ava's 16th birthday, she gave her father a small framed drawing she had secretly worked on for weeks. It showed a tired father holding a sleeping little girl beneath a rainy sky while warm light poured from the doors of a beautiful hotel. Above the picture, she had written a single sentence. "The richest person is the one who makes strangers feel like family." Marcus stared at the drawing for several minutes without speaking. Out of every business award, every magazine cover, every billion-dollar achievement, nothing compared to those handwritten words from his daughter. Years later, after Marcus officially retired, Ava stood before thousands of employees during the company's annual conference. She shared the story of that rainy night. Not as the daughter of a billionaire, but as the little girl who had once wondered whether she and her father had done something wrong. She looked across the audience and said something that no one ever forgot. People will forget the luxury of your hotels. They'll forget the thread count of your sheets and the size of your televisions, but they'll never forget how you made them feel during the hardest day of their lives. The audience rose to its feet. Many employees wiped away tears. Some remembered exactly where they had been when the story first happened. Others had joined the company later but knew its lessons by heart. The applause lasted several minutes, not for Marcus, not for Ava, but for the simple truth that had transformed an entire company. The truth that dignity costs nothing, respect requires no wealth, and kindness is the greatest luxury anyone can ever offer. If this story moved your heart, please don't leave without liking this video, sharing it with someone who believes kindness can change lives, and subscribing to the channel for more inspiring stories. Special request, before you go, comment "Kindness sees the heart." Let's fill the comments with people who believe respect should never depend on appearance. And remember, every stranger you meet is fighting a battle you may never see. A smile, a kind word, or a moment of patience might become the reason someone believes in humanity again. Sometimes, the greatest legacy we leave behind isn't the wealth we build. It's the dignity we give to others when the world has forgotten to see them.